Welcome to the Doing Virtue podcast. I'm your host, Anthony Christ. Tonight, I have both of my co-hosts in our new studio, Brian Hicks and Mark LaRochelle. We're both in-house tonight. And we have a special guest tonight, Charlie Spiering, and we're excited to have him. Charlie began his political career as a journalist 15 years ago as a reporter for the Washington Post columnist Robert Novak. He was a political writer for the Washington Examiner before moving to Breitbart News as a White House correspondent, covering the Obama administration, the Trump administration, and the Biden administration. Currently, he works as a senior political reporter at the Daily Mail. He lives in Virginia with his wife and 6 kids, and most recently, he released his best-selling book entitled Amateur Hour, Kamala Harris in the White House, and we're happy to have him on the show. Charlie, welcome.
Thanks for having me, guys. It's a nice space you have up here.
Yeah, so
you're
this
the first
is
guest.
Yeah, this is actually you're the first guest. This normally is in my guest bedroom, and I have a baby coming in May, and so the podcast got the boot. But this actually works out really well. It's on Main Street, which is nice and minimal setup. So we're hoping to add more as time goes on. But yeah, right now it's a good start. So yeah, we're excited to have you. I appreciate you coming on. I know there's bigger podcasts that you can come on, so we're kind of hoping to do something a little different rather than just talk about your book, which is what most podcasts that you've been on recently have talked about. I do want to talk about it, but I'd like to dig into your past a little bit, not in a bad way. Just kind of where you've been, how you got here, and then we'll get into the book.
You're not doing a book on me because it's the first thing you realize. It's like
I was thinking today about something about like from your roots. You said you're from Wisconsin, right?
Wyoming, actually.
Oh, Wyoming.
Yeah.
So like Wyoming to Washington or something like that as a title, but it's a working title. We'll get there.
Yeah.
So tonight we have a new bottle that I've never tried. It was $34 on sale.
I'm just going to open it now.
Go ahead. Yeah.
Yeah.
Ooh, that was a good one.
Good
and
thing
I
you
got
had a
it.
windscreen on there.
Yeah, right. That pop was wild. So I got it for a couple of reasons. It's an Irish whiskey. Yesterday was St. Patrick's Day, so I thought we'd kind of stay in the St. Patrick's Day merriment. And it's also called Writer's Tears, which I thought was fitting since we have a journalist on tonight. So,
Very appropriate. I mean, the last time I had this actually was kind of a mournful event. One of my colleagues at Breitbart had passed away, and one of her favorite whiskeys was Writer's Tears.
oh, okay.
Oh, wow. Okay.
So I've actually never seen this at the local at the local ABC store before, which doesn't mean it's a new whiskey, but it was new to me. So hopefully it was enjoyable, even though the occasion you were drinking was not.
Yeah, it was definitely one of those celebration of life events. Everybody
That's cool.
had a good time. There were a lot of Breitbart colleagues there, as well as the writer and her family were there, and so it was very, very cathartic to celebrate the career and life of a journalist who just went hard every day, and it was a lot of fun. So
Wow. All right, well,
writers'
Tasting
tears
notes.
writer's notes.
to the writers.
Let's go ahead and cheers to all the writers.
May they cry evermore. So the writers cry whiskey, and liberals cry salty tears.
Leftist tears, you might say.
Salty leftist tears. I guess Keith Olbermann though cries something different. I hear. I don't know.
I don't know what that reference is.
Right.
Well, let's just say, based on what I've seen on the internet, it's yellow.
Oh, yes, I have heard of this. I couldn't remember there was a Twitter war going on, and
I didn't investigate this, but I was puzzled to see these images of Keith Olbermann crying yellow.
Yeah, I remember.
So interesting.
I want to say Matt Walsh said something in response to it because he was trying to own conservatives, but he basically. It kind of came back in his own face,
as it often does.
As it often does, and so it wasn't the best look. It's pretty good. I like it.
Yeah, I like it.
Do you have some tasting notes on this?
The nose, which I am a bad whiskey drinker because I didn't even smell it before consuming it. Sugar,
light.
confectionaries, and bubblegum. I
feel
didn't
like
get
that
bubblegum.
it always ruins it if you say bubblegum. I feel like that immediately takes it down. Like you're just
That's
you're
the
just
first time
admitting
I've
it's a
heard
cheap
that
whiskey.
tasting note.
Right. After the initial strength of the sweetness, malt and cream come to the forefront with vanilla and citrus making an appearance.
Oh, okay.
And then the palate is subtle, elegant, and sweet.
Yeah. Yeah, it's a pretty
Elegant.
It's a pretty typical Irish whiskey. It's triple distilled, so it's really smooth. I think it's distilled in copper barrels or copper pots rather. And for the price, I think it's a solid pour. So
Yeah.
Yeah, ABC apparently had some good deals for St. Patrick's Day this year.
Yeah, they did. I think Jameson was more on sale than it normally is. They had this, and then
So it went from 20 to 10.
no.
Back in my day.
And then what was the other one? I mean, they always have Tullamore Dew. Teeling. That's the one that they don't have very many bottles of that, or I should say there's not a lot of variation. It's just the one like single pot, kind of low shelf, but it's pretty good. Yeah, I like Teeling. Yeah. We went to the Teeling distillery when we were in Ireland. That was it was a good experience, although I don't think that their whiskey's anything particularly special, but I thought it was fun. So you mentioned Breitbart. That's not quite as far back as I want to go, but we can go ahead and start there just because I'm curious. When did you start working at Breitbart, and how did you kind of get involved?
I think it was spring 2014. So it was right when this was after Andrew passed away, and they were trying to build up the site to build up like a Washington presence with reporters. And I was currently writing for the Washington Examiner at the time, and spoke with Steve Bannon and Alex Marlowe and the folks there. They had a pretty good editor who was a friend of mine, Jonathan Strong, and so they all kind of like reached out because I had done a lot of like the quick hit journalism that was like just making its way into the sort of the sphere. Now a lot of that quick hit stuff is done on Twitter, but first, right? But at the time we were just running these pretty fast paced minute to minute political blogs during the campaigns. And yeah, at that point, they were just looking to build up their Washington staff and recruited me. It was the first time I'd been recruited for a job, so it was pretty cool. And at that point, Breitbart definitely had a lot of life. They had just redesigned their website and gone forward. So it was a pretty fun difference. And for a starving journalist, it was also an upgrade in pay. So that was exciting.
Totally.
And yeah, we as starting off with a young family, we really appreciated that as well.
For sure. Okay. Was Breitbart the same type of inspiration to you that he was to a lot of people? Because I know that other than Rush Limbaugh, probably the most conservative or like well-quoted conservative that I hear about with people that currently work in either journalism or politics. Like I know James O'Keefe got started with him. I know that a lot of I think Ben Shapiro and Jeremy Boring got started with him, or at least were friends with him. Did you kind of have a similar experience of knowing his work, knowing his mindset, or was that separate because you weren't a political analyst quite at that point?
Yeah, at that point, Andrew had made it to D.C. for CPAC and for a couple of other events in Washington, and so anytime he came through town, he was always bringing along his posse of, he would call them his island of misfit toys, and and it was such a relief for a reporter, because you go to so many like dreary political events when you're in Washington, and he was just such a breath of fresh air, energy. All of his people were fun and exciting, and the events were always very fun, and it was very un-Washington of him. And even at the sort of the embassy, which was a row house just off Capitol Hill, and Bannon and the crew there kind of kept up that spirit going forward. And yeah, it was always a good time, and I certainly appreciated the fresh approach to politics at that point.
Yeah. Was he one of the instigators? I was just hearing something about this on the radio not too long ago. Was he involved with the Drudge Report to a certain extent?
Right.
Because I remember growing up, my dad would listen to Rush Limbaugh, and he would a lot of times just like refresh the Drudge Report just to kind of see quick headlines, what's going on, because there was a lot of different stuff happening on there. Was he involved in that, or am I mistaken?
Yeah. His book, Righteous Indignation, is definitely a must-read for anybody involved in conservative politics or journalism. He was just kind of one of these Gen Xers that was just obsessed with the internet, and loved the Drudge Report and loved refreshing and getting the latest news. This is in a pre-Twitter world that he existed in. The Drudge Report really was that kind of one-stop shop, see what's going on. And then he ultimately worked for Matt Drudge just countless hours and focused on that, and then eventually he was recruited by Arianna Huffington to run the Huffington Post, and that was also unique, strange flip for him, but he was, he always talked about how he wanted to give the left the tools to reveal who they really were on that website.
Interesting.
But he also continued to pursue just minute-to-minute breaking news in like very dogged fashion. And, delighted in sticking it to the mainstream media's eye anytime they could beat him to a story or a scoop or challenge something that they had reported. And so he kind of had that freewheeling, fun-loving love of internet journalism that you see from so many, even today. And then, Lord help us, when he got Twitter, he was just a nonstop machine. He was just...
Repost.
Yeah, he probably would have been the first to be banned with the amount of back and forth. He just delighted in trolling the left on everything.
Sure.
And so he spent a lot of time doing that. And then he unfortunately passed away early. And really sad day for a lot of people in the movement, but a lot of people still draw a lot of inspiration from him, his speeches and his writings and his energy. His idea was the citizen journalist can make a difference, and they can and should speak up when they see something wrong. And I think that the entire movement is now flourishing with that mentality.
Right.
And Andrew is one of the first to sort of encourage people to do more.
Yeah, and it seems like I think that mentality you can definitely see at the Daily Mail, the Daily Caller, the Daily Wire, all of these new organizations, and they're doing it kind of on a larger scale, but I think on a more personal scale. But probably what you see that the most with nowadays is James O'Keefe, like what he's doing with his, is it OMG now that's not Project Veritas anymore because he was kicked off, I think. And it's a lot of it is just like getting citizens to someone you think's involved in a big scandal, take a tape recorder, take this device and a body cam, and let's like break this news story. Mm-hmm. I guess that might be a more extreme version of what you're talking about, but yeah, I mean, you see that all the time. He's constantly breaking stories about the CIA and the FBI, and some of it does seem a little bit conspiratorial, but at the same time, there has to be corruption at some of these big places, and a lot of it's just you have citizens that they know this person and they get them to open up at a bar, and
right,
they get a lot of details. So
he gets these characters in the deep state to just talk honestly and openly about what they actually believe, and that's definitely fits in with the Breitbart model. It's just, if you just give these people a voice and a platform, they will tell you what they really believe, and most sane Americans, common sense Americans, will see it for the insanity that it is, because too often today I think you do have the left, and you certainly see that in the Biden campaign, where every word is carefully constructed to diminish the meaning. I mean, we see this all the time, especially on the issue of abortion. Every word is workshopped by the PRs and the polling companies and the PR firms, and they have don't use this word because it's divisive, but
illegal.
Use this
in the State of the Union.
And that's definitely
undocumented individual.
A shot at the most unscripted person in Washington. Joe Biden has now become very scripted, and when he's stuck on teleprompter, it's very hard to really get any sort of inspiration from his speeches, as we say. Sure. You kind of see it every day when he's looking at a prompter. He kind of does that squint, and he's looking as if he's looking across the room, trying to make out somebody's face, but he's trying to read and comprehend the teleprompter, and it really doesn't help him. But Biden off script can certainly cause some problems as well, as we've seen.
This is going to go down a little bit of a rabbit hole, and so we can circle back to it later, but something I would be interested to know your opinions on, or just because you're a Catholic journalist, where does the line of, like, I guess kind of like fraternal correction with Biden specifically, probably other people, but because he's the commander-in-chief, right, he is the person that you hear about all the time, where does the fraternal correction of, yes, you messed up, you said an incorrect thing, especially him claiming to be Catholic, there's a lot of things we should criticize him for, but also Catholic charity comes into play, especially when you see him like very clearly is not mentally there, just is forgetting things all the time, is feeble, is old, and I feel like there can be kind of a push on the right to just make fun of everything that he does, kind of his gaffes. And part of me is like, yeah, but you signed up for this. Like, I don't know how much you're running the day to day, but you decided, like, no one forced you to be president. Like, you decided to do this, so you kind of deserve everything that's coming to you. But at the same time, it's like, it's also not necessarily his fault that some of these things are happening, because there's people in his, his cabinet that are making him do this and are kind of walking, carefully walking him down a sidewalk and things like that. And it seems like this very fine balance between, you need to criticize the things he's doing incorrectly on like a policy level or on a moral level, but when it comes to him just forgetting someone's name or speaking incoherently, it almost seems like it could cross into being very uncharitable, just because he's so old. And I'm curious, in journalism, how you deal with that, because you want to point out how terrible he is at being president, but not, I don't know, like, not attacking him personally, but he also deserves to be attacked personally. So I don't know how you, how do you handle that?
Just as a journalist, you just try to stick with the facts, and the actual quotes and the truth. You don't need to be vindictive when you're reporting something, but you also need to report when you do write an article. You take into context this entire experience, but usually, and you don't want to just jump on everything. Like, that's sort of what political opponents do. Political opponents will jump on everything and insist that this is one more reason why. And you certainly see that on Twitter a lot, where it's just like, well, you're kind of reaching, but I get it. It's your job. So, but I think you just approach it with a little level of common sense, with a little bit of honesty, and being able to put it within context. And as you said, he is the president of the United States, and as long as you remain factual and not personally, which as reporters, it's pretty easy not to get too personal with reporting.
Right. Yeah.
When you go and do it for so many years, it's kind of knee-jerk reaction. Just call balls and strikes and not get personally engaged in it.
Yeah, I wonder how much of it depends on your position as well. Like, if you're a commentator, I feel like Ben Shapiro or someone who has a huge platform probably owes his audience the truth, obviously. But if he goes too far in just making fun of Biden, even though that might get a good reaction, that might not be the prudent decision for him to do. Whereas someone like the Babylon Bee, it's like their entire job is to, like, they're making fun of conservatives, they're making fun of everyone.
Right.
So the fact that they're talking about, all of these things recently, like with the undocumented person,
right,
they're making fun of that. They're making fun of, Biden has a panic attack because he sees a flight of stairs, and it's like, yeah, you are making fun of him, but it is pretty funny.
But it's within the realm of humor. It's very Chestertonian in that way. I think that Chesterton offers us a lot of guidance on how to be funny without being mean-spirited.
Yeah, I'd be interested in kind of, we can go down that rabbit hole a little more later, but I feel like there is a lot of people hate Biden, and they should, for a lot of good reasons. But I also think that sometimes people go too far with how much they talk about his senility and, like, he's just losing it and he's terrible. And it's like, all of those things are true, but to me, unless you're making fun of it as like in a satirical way, it's not really productive. It might be true and it might be entertaining, but really what you should say is, here's the policies that are failing. Here's what we need to do. And if you actually have a platform, you need to talk about the path forward and not just always talk about how bad everything is.
Right. If you want to be a successful politician or run a political movement, you have to talk about what you're for. Yeah. And Republicans typically are more happy talking about what they're against, rather than offer any, substantive policy differences. And that's plagued them for years, because the playbook shows, if I just go hard personal and accuse them of being socialist leftists, then the American people will vote our way. But it's getting kind of old at this point. I think most people, certainly reporters, are kind of seeing through it. It's something that they've tried really hard to do in 2020, convince the entire world that Joe Biden was this radical leftist. But I think that and certainly the American people have experienced the results of that, right, with the massive spending bills and all of the policies that he's produced. And I think that's a pretty good, even better argument in 2024, really looking at, hey, actually his policies have led us to ruin, and we actually have some good ideas. I don't know how Donald Trump plans to fix inflation, but Gosh, he's sure ready to do it. So we'll see how it goes.
Buckle up.
Yeah.
I want to go back a little bit. You mentioned you were from Wyoming, and I'm just curious, like just maybe a couple minute summary of kind of the area you grew up, how that led you to Christendom, your experience at Christendom, and then kind of into political journalism and how that started. Just a bit of a recap, just for anyone who's not familiar with you and your background.
Right. So yeah, I grew up on a farm in Wyoming, one of 11 children. So pretty awesome, idyllic life growing up. A lot of hard work and a lot of being cold and working in the wind and Wyoming weather. But yeah, just a very good experience there. And then of course, being a large Catholic family, as soon as college came into the picture, Christendom was one of the big three at the time. I went in 2001 as a freshman, so it was either Christendom or TAC or Steubenville, I think, was the big three. I know Dallas was on the scene, but hadn't really quite built its reputation yet. Ave Maria was not there yet either.
Was Wyoming Catholic not?
No, it wasn't
Okay.
in the picture either. So I applied. My older sister had gone to TAC and done really well there. I had applied to TAC and Christendom, and TAC put me on the waiting list, and Christendom accepted me without a waiting list. So I ended up at Christendom. So
Do you know if that was because of grades, or they were just trying to even out?
no, they were definitely had a waiting list. So
Okay.
they're the TAC has only grown, or Thomas Aquinas College in California. So we just use these.
I'm fine with as derogatory as you want to be about TAC. That's
just
totally
use
fine.
the-
It stands for that awful college.
Yeah.
How many students were at Christendom at the time when you went?
Oh gosh, I don't know. There was, yeah, I think it was around 300 or 400, but
Okay.
yeah, there was definitely. I guess I don't know if you experienced the same thing, but you definitely get a lot of attrition in the freshman class. Not everybody comes back,
Right.
so
Yep.
and then certainly through sophomore year, people leave too, and then obviously junior and senior is much smaller, but.
Was your graduating class like 75 then, or not even that big?
Probably a little less. I don't know for sure.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Because I think it was about probably later that it started getting to about the hundreds, when you have like a consistent, your incoming class is 125 or 150, and then you have 25 to 30 people drop out over the course of the first year or so, and then your graduating class is around 100. But that probably was a little bit after you were there. What caused you to go into history? Is that something you'd always been interested in?
A little bit. Obviously, I was interested in journalism, and actually, before I went to Christendom, I was actually looking at other schools, journalism schools. Benedictine in Kansas was one of them. They had a communications program. When I visited that college, there was a very helpful teacher there that I talked to, and he said, I said, well, I want to get into journalism, but I also really like this college in Virginia, and I don't know how to make that fit. He's like, well, just go with the college you like and let everything else follow the path that it takes you. So that was good advice, and certainly, going through the core curriculum and the introduction to history, that's certainly the one that was most interesting to me, especially as someone looking at a career of writing in journalism. It was very attractive, and it was great because history finally was able to live in the classroom. It wasn't just about memorizing names and dates. And I think Christendom is well known for its ability to really bring everybody. It's a history of ideas. It's not about names and dates. It's about ideas and people, and certainly with Warren Carroll's ideal that history is made by virtuous citizens, and those are the ones that actually change the world through God's grace, of course. But
Right.
They didn't have a political science major at that time.
they did. They
Oh,
did.
really? Okay.
Yeah, it was Dr. Lucky, Dr. Way.
Okay.
And so they did have politics. Yeah,
Was that a major at the time, or they just had political
I think
science?
so. I think
Okay.
it was.
Okay.
It wasn't something I was interested in, though. I wasn't that interested in politics, honestly, until I got my first internship, which was with Robert Novak in Washington, working as an intern, and then speaking to my first, there was a senior reporter that worked with Novak. His name was David Fredoso, and he was a mentor of mine. And I still remember going out to coffee one day, and he, to talk about my future career and ideas. And I was like, well, I don't really like politics, but I do like journalism. And he's like, well, buddy, you better get on board because 80% of all journalism is politics. So that kind of woke me up a little bit. And certainly I had a long history of following politics because I truly enjoyed growing up. Long hours in the tractor. I enjoyed listening to AM radio news. Certainly. And I still remember my grandfather having a whole bunch of news magazines and newspapers. Anytime I was at his house, I was always consuming that pretty regularly. So, yeah, I did have a deep love of news and politics was part of it. But, I guess maybe there was a part of me, the college part of me, that maybe thought we could exist outside of politics or focus on travel or something.
Sure. So why journalism? Like, I understand being interested in the news, be it it's flashy, maybe you have like a sports team or a celebrity or just something like that you kind of like to follow and you like the updates and maybe, for a lack of a better term, kind of the drama of it. But that's different than wanting to actually write it, right? Because you could be interested in that type of thing but not want to write. You just want to be the consumer. So what drew you to the idea of wanting to be the producer, like wanting to write the news and promulgate in that way?
Yeah, I think the idea of experiencing it and being the first is always attractive. Not being just a consumer, but to be there and watching history happen. It's kind of cheesy, but certainly in Washington, you get those experiences there when you first start off. And even today, you can't walk into the Capitol without being struck with awe at how monumental, it is and how important it is to our country. And just being on the ground there is a real privilege. Certainly being in the White House was also a real privilege every time you walk up the driveway. And, they let you through the gate and you swipe your pass and then you realize you have a very, important level of access and that you got to do it to the very best you can to use that to provide something different. And that was certainly at that point, it's like, how can we offer something different than what the mainstream media is offering today?
Yeah. I know that the history major at Christendom has a lot of writing involved. It probably depends on the path and the classes that you take and all that, but I think generally speaking, it's one that has a bit more writing. Was that your experience, that there was a lot of kind of writing assignments and you had to have some creative writing assignments that really helped you get down that path? Or
one of the things, I think it was one of the theology professors made that comment one time. It stuck with me. He's like, the one marketable skill you'll have when you exit Christendom is writing. And certainly for all the ups and downs and ins and outs of the benefits and the pitfalls.
Turabian,
the benefits and the pitfalls of a liberal arts education, everything you learn and the ability to write and think is just number one for journalists.
Yeah.
The ability to write and think is great for every job, but for journalists, it's number one. And so I'm still incredibly thankful for my Christendom and liberal arts education because I wasn't necessarily the best student, but I certainly came away with that ability and be able to see the differences and, being able to see truth and understand it and experience it. And, that's just been invaluable.
I think that's something you're seeing kind of happen more recently, is that with Jordan Peterson's Academy and with his writing program, he hasn't strictly said this, but really what he's trying to do is create a liberal arts education without calling it that. Like, you study the classics, you can read, you can comprehend, you can write, and then obviously the addition for him is to be able to make it affordable. So you can do it online, you can do it in person, but make it really cheap. I think they're trying to do like $15,000 for all 4 years or something.
Oh, wow.
And get accredited. But he's a huge proponent of, like, you need to be well read. Like, that's number one. But being well read doesn't have a lot of benefits if you don't share that. And the best way, and like the way that you become unstoppable, is if you can actually write well.
Right.
And unfortunately, I think a lot of colleges, even though you might be very well educated in some respects, you don't know how to write. And that just makes it really difficult, going through this subject matter and then you can't write. So, yeah, Christendom, I think, is by far one of the most well-known colleges in the Catholic world for just students being able to walk away from there and like, I can read, I can write, I can make a difference because I can think creatively, even though I didn't have a specific, I had a major, but
yeah,
sometimes you get laughed out of an interview for being a poli-sci major, maybe not a poli-sci major as much, but like a theology major. People don't necessarily care about that, but if you show that you can read something dense and then write a summary, a really detailed summary, that's unstoppable.
Mm-hmm.
And that's exactly what I assume most journalists, the hiring people in a newspaper, that if they're hiring journalists, that's what they want to see.
Yeah, and the internship was invaluable just to be able to get a start somewhere.
Yeah. And
even though it was mostly just research and a little bit of reporting here and there, it was very beneficial. And I think that's what and what they'll tell you is when it comes down to getting a job, your experiences. Not only your experience, but who you know, and who you've met, and who knows you, and what your reputation is more important than where you got your degree. Now I do remember an editor that would only hire, would only prioritize students from his alma mater, because it was some fancy state school, and he just basically used that as a feeder program. So there is that aspect, but certainly when you're just trying to get in the door, I think that it's the experience that matters the most.
Did you get that internship like right out of college?
No, I went to seminary for about about 4 months. It didn't last long. Thankfully, the Lord was very clear. But
which seminary?
So the seminary in Wyoming sent their seminarians to Denver, so St. John Vianney in Denver.
Okay.
And they were very unique for having a spirituality year that would only focus on getting seminarians focused on their spiritual life. And so that was hugely beneficial. Helped me, sit down with both mentors and brothers who were also wrestling with this idea of whether or not they were being called to the priesthood. And thankfully it became pretty clear that wasn't where I was supposed to do. And I'm insanely grateful that it didn't take that long, because it was certainly something I wanted. It was definitely, when you graduate from Christendom, you kind of have that, you kind of can see how that would be such an exciting, beneficial thing to do. Not only the highest calling, but one of true love and joy. Having your, experiencing the sense of community and brotherhood and fraternity with fellow priests. And that was certainly something that was very attractive to me. But yeah, it became pretty clear I had to move on. And then after doing concrete for a couple months in Wyoming, finally decided to take my first step into journalism, and that's what got me the internship and getting started.
Was there someone there that you knew, or did you just apply for it and were qualified enough and got it?
Yeah, strangely enough, my sister's roommate knew David Fredoso, who was the senior reporter there, and he had gone on a date with sister's roommate, so she mentioned my name, and that's how I got the job.
Nice.
You never know what one date's going to result in.
I know.
That's awesome. And how did you do multiple internships there over the summer between college years, or?
No, I just did one internship, and this is after college. And then I did stay on a couple weeks to help out. And then ultimately I got my first reporting job for the Rappahannock News out in Rappahannock County. It was hiring a staff reporter at that time. So I was able to apply for that and get into the daily news of Rappahannock County, hustling and bustling Rappahannock County. So I was one of two reporters there, and I was covering crime, courts, school, and school sports. So plenty busy.
Yeah.
I'm just going to move this so you have a little more cord if you need to move.
Okay.
How long did you work there for?
I worked there for about a year, and then Fredoso was the senior reporter working for Novak, was moving on and asked if I wanted his job. And I said, that was a pretty big step for me, but absolutely. And Novak was at the stage in life where, he just needed somebody somebody around to do research to help him do reporting and write out these. He had this, I think it was bi-weekly, or no, every other week. He would have a political newsletter that he would send out, as well as his 3 times a week he had columns. So.
And those were just like op-ed columns, or?
Well, Novak was very good about putting reporting in every column. So he kind of walked the line of having breaking news and also giving his opinion on politics at the same time. And yeah, what a different world it was then, because a mention in Novak's column could make or break you in the conservative movement. So that was pretty cool, working with him and experiencing that. And yeah, that was. And then I worked there for about a year, and then he ended up getting brain cancer and had to step down and retire. Wow. So that was also pretty moving, packing up his office and sort of shutting that whole place down and selling his Corvette. That was kind of wild.
Did you get to take it for a spin at least?
Yeah, I had to drive it to the dealership to drop it off to be sold.
By way of California.
Yeah, no, sadly, just down one of the boring DC boulevards. But yeah, it was definitely a very, very cool, very beneficial experience working for him and just learning how to do research. And it was funny. He would come to me. It was the opposite. It was the opposite. It wasn't, I need you to research this and find me something interesting. He would have these conversations with these sources, and he'd be like, I need you to track down this one thing that happened. And it wasn't something that he wanted to find. It was something that already existed. He wasn't asking me to uncover anything. He was just asking me to find it because a source had told him about it, like a transcript or a moment or an event. And so yeah, a lot of that, and then a lot of my own reporting was pretty interesting. So.
Did you have some freedom in that area? Like, hey, I want something. I want an article on X, but you kind of have some freedom there, or was it pretty restricted?
Yeah, pretty. You could pitch him different things, different ideas for columns, but yeah, a lot of it was just helping him out with the research and the editing his columns and finding interesting things, and even down to where you're answering the phones and connecting him with people. But yeah, it was awesome.
What were your work weeks like? Were you working crazy hours, or was it?
Yeah, it was the typical 8 to 5 or something.
Okay.
So yeah, back then it was pretty normal. I lived in Falls Church at the time and metroed in every day. So for that year, that was, and that was expected. You never really complained about it. And then I was, also, well, yeah, that was definitely the Falls Church era. And then, yeah, that was still a decent commute, but not too bad.
And then from there, you were recruited to Breitbart, or did you have something?
No, I went and worked for the Examiner after that.
Okay.
After Novak retired, I knew some of his. I knew one of the columnists there, Tim Carney, which I don't know if you know him. He's still works at the Examiner and does a lot of great journalism on families and parents and families, and is just coming out with a new book actually, which looks really interesting. It's called Family Unfriendly, and he's sort of looking at society and policy and how that really restricts people when they want to start a family and have lots of kids. So it'll be very interesting.
Like how families are like disincentivized to have kids.
Right.
Okay. Okay.
Yeah, and so that is a funny thing about working in Washington. When people find out you have 6 kids, it's just like, what? You're insane. And then you go to church on Sunday and you're like, oh, there's so-and-so family with 11 and another family with
we're in the middle,
13, and you're like, well, clearly no one's impressed here.
So how long were you you were at the Washington Examiner, and then you were asked to be part of Breitbart, and that was earlier it sounded like that was a pretty obvious move, right? You were like, sweet, let's go.
Yeah, the Examiner, we had done a lot at the Examiner covering news, and certainly when Breitbart came knocking, there was a little hesitation because of the reputation of the company. And there's a lot of people in Washington who hated Breitbart at that time, so it was a bit of a jump to just be like.
Did they hate them for good reasons?
A lot of it was just because they were fearless and so far as willing to tackle sacred cows and attack the establishment. And there's there's a lot of virtue there, but there's also a lot of people who are very angry. Like, you're attacking the establishment, but you're not trying to get things done.
Yeah. And I think that in some sense is a fair criticism of some big conservative journalism where, like we were saying earlier with conservatives or with just the Republican Party at this point, it's like, look at the Democrats. They did this. This is a horrible bill. We're voting no. And you're like, okay, I guess I agree with that. But at the same time, I don't care so much about how bad the bill is. Tell me, write a good bill and tell me why I should vote for it. I can get on board with that, but all the negativity, you start just tuning out, So I could see how if it was constantly that type of reporting, how that could give you a bad reputation.
Yeah, a lot of at that time, however, it was right during the Tea Party era, and so Breitbart had a reputation of and for actually doing aggressive journalism against establishment Republicans. And if you remember, like everyone in the Senate would focus, and Mitch McConnell and everybody at the NRSC would focus on the establishment candidate. Yeah. That's why you had them backing and funding people like Charlie Crist for Senator of Florida when Marco Rubio comes in and he's all of a sudden the Tea Party favorite. A lot of people were also really angry with Breitbart because they did everything they could to stop Marco Rubio's and the Gang of Eight, their immigration deal that they really wanted to get across. After they lost the election with Romney, the conclusion that was the best thing we can do is show illegals that we'll give them amnesty, and that'll be, if we just focus on immigration reform, then that'll bring everybody to the fold. And so Breitbart was unique in the fact that they're like, no, this is amnesty for illegals, and we're going to call it that, and we're not going to let you run it. And they didn't, the conservatives that were pushing that bill were doing a very aggressive job of marketing it as conservative and as the way forward. But I think Breitbart made a lot of people angry because the establishment, they ultimately, in the upstarts in that, Jeff Sessions was one of the leaders of opposing that bill. And, that bill ultimately did not get passed. And I think Breitbart there's a good, they were largely responsible for fueling that movement at the time. And and then it has only gone even further on issues of immigration towards that path.
It's funny, I think just because of how old I was, I don't remember a lot about the Tea Party movement in terms of the players. One thing that does stand out in my mind, and I think a lot of people think of this still, is Rush Limbaugh, his One If by Land, Two If by Tea, like commercials. He had some like tea company that he sponsored, and it was like a Tea Party movement, but it was sweet tea, I'm pretty sure. And I just remember on his show, he would be like, but first, and he would talk about that. And I was like, why is he advertising tea? I don't understand this. And my dad had to explain to me, no, it's the Tea Party. And I was like, no, that happened years ago, like where they threw tea. And so it was this odd realization of, they're using past events to try to explain what's going on and what they stand for now. But I didn't realize that it was like a modern conservative movement and who was involved. It was all very confusing, but that's really the extent that I know about the Tea Party movement as it was.
Yeah, that was it was a big thing, and that began with the Wall Street bailouts and I guess what do we call it, the Great Recession in 2008.
2008, yeah, without the housing market and all that.
Yeah, that's when you had just the growing populist movements. It sparked populist movements on the right and the left, and on the right, the sort of the Tea Party movement emerged out of that and really brought Republicans in strong. I think in 2010, when Republicans seized the House majority, it was the biggest flip in years. I don't know the exact numbers, but it was definitely a monumental moment for Republicans, and they really had an opportunity to do some pretty immense things. But as usual, they did not really capitalize on that.
Squandered it away.
What were the I guess the main points of the Tea Party movement? Like what did they? So what it was like because of the Great Recession, and like they
A
just
lot of it
changed,
was
or?
Wall Street bailouts. They were just
Okay.
really angry about that.
Okay.
Overspending, and certainly Obamacare was the big threat.
Right.
So much so that just the very idea of Obamacare was just completely like an alarm fire for conservatives and
With like the HHS mandate and all that stuff. Like,
Yeah.
yeah.
and they fought really hard against that, and it seemed like it was almost defeated after Senator Scott Brown in Massachusetts beat the Democrat candidate there, which was stunning, and it brought the Democrat Senate majority below 60 votes. So they thought they had it beat without a 60 vote filibuster proof majority. How were Democrats going to move that forward? And that's when Harry Reid and the Obama White House came up with the idea of, hey, if we just pass it under budget reconciliation, we'd only need 50 votes because somehow it's going to save money. If we can prove that it's going to save money, and if we just pass it as a budget reconciliation bill, then we can actually pass it with just a simple 50 vote majority, and that's how most Senate legislation is done at this point.
Interesting. So they kind of set a precedent for that.
Absolutely, yeah.
Yeah.
I think the biggest thing Republicans did was the tax cuts using that same idea of budget reconciliation. So
It's such a fascinating thing that it seems like it comes up in politics now a lot, where there's this divide on the Republican side of how to be productive. And part of it's like, do we follow what the Constitution outlines and follow kind of what tradition does? And even though we might get beat, we're doing it the right way. But the Democrats aren't going to play by the rules, and they're going to do everything they can to win. And so how far can we go before we've kind of compromised on our principles? But at the same time, if we never either compromise or play like are sneaky about it, we are never going to win. We are never going, so it's like, I think a big thing that comes up is voting, like traditionally, hopefully at one point voting like will become a day, and it's a national holiday, and everyone goes and votes. And then there's very few exceptions for mail-in ballots. But until we get to that point, if they're going to use all the mail-in ballots and all of these different ways to mess up the elections, do we just do it the traditional way and lose every time? Or at least risk losing? Or is it something where we kind of need to, and not cheat a little bit, but kind of play by their rules to make sure that we're staying in the game? Because otherwise it's just like, okay, yep, I guess we lost again, but hey, we did the right thing. It's like, so what? At a certain extent, like, who cares if you're doing it the right way? If we always lose, you might as well just quit.
Yeah, you'll see a lot of Republican operatives sort of joke cynically that we need more ballot harvesting. So,
Right.
Absolutely, and I think that the RNC is working on that as well. You had Laura Trump, when she first took over as RNC co-chair, that was one of her issues she brought forward. It's like, we have to get serious about early voting. And it's disappointing for any sort of traditionalist that wants to just roll in and vote on election day. But yeah, they've really changed the rhetoric and put in a lot of funding. There's a lot of operatives who are selling that to campaigns. Like, look, you need to bank your votes so you know how many votes you have. And that was certainly the case in 2020, but it's become even more clear that you need. And then sort of the rhetoric is telling voters, bank your vote early before they steal it.
Right. Yeah, if you want it to count.
If you want to,
early,
make sure. And then that way Republicans have an idea of like how many votes we have, how many votes we need, and sort of move to a little more scientific way of counting your votes instead of just pulling out all the stops and hoping everybody gets out to vote.
Yeah.
Just count the votes at the end of the day, because it's not enough.
Yeah.
Did with the Tea Party movement, did that influence you? Like, I guess, where were you in your career that started happening?
Yeah, that was it was a very hot, very lively political movement. So as a journalist, it's just one that you're obviously following because it had a lot of power there. And Andrew Breitbart was part of the Tea Party movement. He was famous because when all the left in the media and all the Democrats were going around complaining about these Tea Party people who were just, sexist, racist, bigots, and it wasn't about overspending. It was about racism and about Obama being black, and these were just bigots. But Andrew Breitbart was infuriated by that, and every opportunity he would just get in people's faces and just being like, "You're lying. That is not who these people are. I spend time with these people. They're good people. They're patriots, and they are the most tolerant, loving people you'll ever meet." And certainly and he did a great job about pushing back against that narrative. And I think it's very clear today that and you see that all the time among politicians, like, oh, these angry people are gathering and threatening me and my staff with their anger, and they're just being intolerant. And like, that's what democracy is. That's, an angry populace was angry with their leaders and call you on the phone and let you know that they don't want this bill passed and they don't want them to support that.
Yet the city of Chaz and all the riots for BLM is just peaceful protesting,
right.
Totally allowed by the Constitution, should be encouraged.
Well, at that time, it was Occupy Wall Street and we had lived-in experience there because the Occupy Wall Street camp was right outside our office at the Examiner. And so we saw that every day walking in, and it was very much, you could see the difference between the right populists and the leftist populists. And so it's become even more clear just going forward. Now these little sparks of a movement, you have the Tea Party and the Occupy, and now those ideas have been baked into society to where it's not just happening in a small camp or at a town hall meeting anymore. It's happening in real cities and states. And you can see how that's kind of blossomed into the future of both sides of the political aisle at this point.
Yeah.
At Breitbart, was everyone kind of on the same page, or was there kind of like a big spectrum of like conservative where you had different levels of whatever? And kind of following that question, what are your thoughts on conservatives who kind of just like, there's just like a lot of division and they're constantly criticizing the other party or not the other party, the other, like your fellow sort of conservative. Because in my mind, there's like that whole drama between Steven Crowder and the Daily Wire. And like, there's a guy on YouTube, Mark Dice, who has this massive following, and he just constantly he's very Trump is right. Trump is good at everything. And so I'm going to criticize the Daily Wire or whoever if they criticize Trump or whatever.
Or it's the same thing with like Charlie Kirk and people who are very pro-Trump, which a lot of times what they're saying is true, but they're not willing to say, hey, this was a bad move. Trump should not have done that. That was stupid. I'll still vote for him, but that was stupid. They're not willing to get over that because they're just so diehard. Republican candidate has to win.
Right. Is that divisive for the party as it's sort of in like the Republican Party where big names in sort of journalism are just kind of like at odds with each other in the Republican Party?
Yeah, I think we had a little bit of that. I think it was, this is all public knowledge, but Ben Shapiro was running a weekly column for Breitbart. Even though he had started his own show and moved on to the Daily Wire, he was still writing journalism for Breitbart, and he famously quit his position because the people at Breitbart were, taking Trump seriously, taking him at his word, and not necessarily. There's a huge movement we certainly saw. The true conservative movement was very anti-Trump and didn't trust him on anything. Right. Breitbart was unique that they saw him, rightfully so, as this populist figure that was energizing people. And that's certainly how I saw it. I didn't really understand Trump when he first came on the scene. He wasn't speaking a language I was familiar with. But the more you went to his rallies, the more you heard him speak, the more you saw his reaction, his performance at the debates, is even just as somebody watching politics, the way he was running circles around all the establishment.
He'll be in jail. Yeah, right, it's just
but mostly with the Republican primary debates, the way he just, made Jeb Bush look like an absolute fool. And that was also astonishing to me is how people in Washington and in conservative politics were like, yep, Jeb, he's our guy. He's going to win. He's going to get it.
Wow.
And I was just astounded by the idea. Another Bush, a third Bush as the president of the United States. I was like, it's just fundamentally un-American. And certainly a whole lot of people felt the same way. They didn't want another Bush. They didn't want a continuation of that family and those policies. And so you definitely saw Trump really strike a chord. He was speaking a different language. Ted Cruz was speaking sort of the true conservative language, which certainly had its impact. But yeah, just going to his rallies and talking with voters, they did not use any of that language that, has been sort of drummed into our heads since Reagan and, Rush Limbaugh and all of that. And he was talking to regular people with common sense proposals.
And really like fighting the establishment, not just, no, their spending bill is bad. Listen to this spending bill. He's like, who cares about the spending bills? Like farmers don't have X. And it's like, yeah, that's how you're going to win in Iowa. That's how you're going to win in some of these swing states, is actually speaking to the people that have been stepped on for years.
Yeah.
Because conservatives, they're so out of touch a lot of times. Like Mitt Romney, like kind of a milquetoast human. Like there's no
True
way.
conservative Mitt Romney.
Right, and it's
I
like
think he was mocked during CPAC for saying he was he was seriously conservative and just like
yeah, and it's like, okay, sure, you vote Republican, but for all intents and purposes, you're just a Democrat. Like you're just so weak that you're not going to fight the fight that we need you to fight, and we're only going to vote for you because you're a better alternative than Barack Obama. But okay, fine.
Right.
Like,
and
so what?
Everybody that supported the Romneys and the Jeb Bushes, and they were always very adamant that it was, when the primary was over, you had to get with the team and support the Republican candidate and stop complaining about all their faults and mistakes and problems and, their weaknesses on issues that you cared about. And get in line and vote for the guy. And I think you still talk to conservatives who feel extremely frustrated when you have somebody like a Mike Pence come out last weekend and say, I cannot in good conscience endorse Donald Trump. Like, hello.
Yeah.
You asked us, you and all your ilk asked us to vote for the Romneys, the John McCains, when they clearly didn't have, their best interests in heart.
Yeah.
And I think that it's absurd for these Republicans pretending that they're holier than Trump.
Yeah.
And that that they can't in good conscience step in and support somebody who is I can understand, and I certainly understood a lot of people that I talked to who said that they could not vote for Trump because they didn't trust him. And a lot of conservatives
like initially when he
2016
thought that he was just a lying huckster and that they couldn't trust him. But I think when you have someone with a strong record on issues that so many conservatives care about and did not waffle on a lot of them, I think that it's especially, I think it's kind of silly for, conservatives to pretend that somehow they can't trust him for a second term.
Right. I saw a tweet the other day, probably 3 days ago, that I reposted that Jeremy Boring posted. And he has some interesting views. Obviously, I don't agree with him on a lot of religious things, but in a conservative sense, he strikes me as a very... someone very influenced by Breitbart, and I don't know that much about Breitbart, but from what I do know, a lot of his views seem to line up with him. Mm-hmm. And he said he made this list, and he was like, he was basically saying, like, I trust Ron DeSantis on immigration more than Trump because he's proved himself. I trust Ron DeSantis on the pro-life issue more than Trump because he's proved himself in Florida. On the COVID issue, he was right. And it was basically all of these like platitudes to Ron DeSantis, and at the end he said, but Ron DeSantis is not the candidate, so I'm going to vote for Trump. So it was this interesting way of saying, like, I can both say I think there's a better candidate and be okay with the reality that isn't reality, right? Like, DeSantis isn't the candidate. And I think a lot of the guys at the Daily Wire have expressed this, and I'm sure a lot of other conservative pundits have said, like, I think DeSantis is the better candidate. He's more pro-life. He has a better record. He acted with COVID better. He's not as, tumultuous. Mm-hmm. And if Trump wasn't in the running, he probably would be the Republican nominee, most likely. Maybe not, but there's a pretty strong case to be made for that. But that's not the reality. So stop living in the past and saying, oh, DeSantis was better for this. And it's like, Trump is going to be the nominee. He is the nominee officially. And if you don't want to vote for him, that's something different. But if you're acting like there's someone else better, or, oh, maybe we should vote for RFK because of this, it's like, he's not going to win. So you need to get behind the party that actually wins. And I think that's something conservatives are terrible at doing, is recognizing we need to be principled. We need to have a stance. We need to have our opinions. And at the end of the day, we need to vote for who's going to win, unless there's some, like, if Trump came out and said, you know what, I'm actually not pro-life, I don't agree with that. Okay, maybe that is the thing that causes you to abstain or vote third party or something like that. But until that time, why would you like just by voting for him, you're not saying that you agree with everything that he does. And I think that people get stuck on that. Like they need to vote for the most moral candidate.
Yeah.
And that seems like an unrealistic expectation when you're running against Biden. It's like, I mean, it seems like the standard is pretty low to be better than Biden. And if you have someone who has a proven track record, to me, it seems like you're just accepting defeat.
When I'm talking about it, it's more addressed to like the politicians who make these very public statements, and they're part of the party, and so I think that they should be held accountable. Citizens can have multiple different reasons for why they choose to vote. Are you in a swing state? Does my vote even matter? I can vote for somebody more virtuous because obviously I live in a blue state in Virginia.
Right.
So, but I think in the Republican Party in general, I think it's humorous to see people like Mitt Romney, Mike Pence, Liz Cheney, that handful
take this principled stance.
That handful of people that insist on trying to make this principled stance about why they can't support Trump. When we all when most conservatives stepped in and voted for Liz Cheney, for Dick Cheney, for Mitt Romney, in spite of all their reservations, and have seen how these Republicans have records, and we've seen what they really believe in, what they care about most. Mitt Romney is probably one of the most vain people in the Senate, and that's what he cares about more than anything else. So I think that I think that there's definitely a lot of criticism for those kind of Republican officials who are running for office and losing, no longer have who no longer have a strong enough voice in the Republican Party to sort of steer away from it. So I don't know. Yeah. It'll be interesting.
Going back a little bit, I'm curious. In your bio that I read at the beginning, when you were working for Breitbart, you worked for as a White House correspondent for the Obama administration, the Trump administration, and then the Biden administration. And I would have to imagine that between different press secretaries, between different political things that are going on, that each administration was radically different.
Oh, right.
And so, I guess number one, what is it like being a White House? Not a staffer, but a reporter that's going into the White House that's covering breaking news of terrorist attacks and things that are going on, and you're trying to get direct quotes from whoever the press secretary is and catch senators for comment and things like that. So number one, what is that like? And then number two, what's the difference, like just the difference in administrations on how things are run and how you're treated and things like that? I'm just curious, kind of the insight into what that's like on a day-to-day basis.
Right. When I came in the Obama administration, it was towards the end of the second term. So a lot of reporters who were traditionally there were either on the campaign trail or, working on other stuff. There wasn't a whole lot going on in the second half of the administration. So, just going in and attending the press briefings and getting to be well enough known by the press secretary and being able to come up with fun questions to ask that other reporters were not asking. So we had a couple of really good... And that's sort of the goal when you're at the White House, is get in that briefing room and ask a question, because that's the way you'll get an answer. The answer might not be satisfactory, but you can actually get them to answer in real time answers to your questions. So that's obviously the sort of the big win at the White House. Why you're there is to...
Was there a lot of strategy behind that? Like, immigration's a big thing. Here are some questions about that, or is it more in the moment, like she said that, now I'm going to ask a follow-up and like
a little bit of both.
Pin them a little bit.
You have a little definitely have some ideas when you go into the briefing room of what you're going to ask, but then you can also see like obvious questions that need to be asked and need to be followed up on, so you can kind of step in and rally behind your colleagues. But there was definitely a good spirit in the room, because everybody was there as a reporter holding Obama accountable, and they were obviously a little soft on Obama, but they were still out there to like make some news, ask some tough questions, and there was definitely a feeling of fellowship when you're an appreciation of anybody who was able to sort of hold their feet to the fire on anything or call out any obvious nonsense. So being a reporter and experiencing that for the first time in just sort of a microcosm of the both the establishment media and the new media outlets, I think it was pretty impressive. And then certainly when Trump came, that's when the whole room exploded, right? You had you had reporters trying to do their job, and then you had a lot of reporters grandstanding and just being completely unprofessional and just absurd. And they're, as they were trying to like become, resist stars, that was disappointing to see, because you kind of want people to hold the powerful accountable without making it about yourself. And I think that a lot of people felt righteous in their cause, and there was a lot of difficult moments in the briefing room and in the White House. But Trump was famously incredibly open to access. He took way more questions than either Obama or certainly Biden. Has a terrible reputation, and I think that the Biden administration has really kind of suffocated that room of journalists to like they don't even view mainstream media at this point as valuable. So it's pretty miserable times for if you're covering the Biden administration and
you mentioned
get an interview with the president.
You mentioned with Obama there was kind of like that fellowship there, and then when Trump it was kind of like divided a little bit.
Yeah.
With Biden, is it kind of just like the journalist that I always think of is, I think his name is Peter Ducey, where he's just like, he asks a lot of really difficult questions and he doesn't really get that much of an answer. Has it kind of shifted, like it's lopsided now? It's very mainstream, very liberal, very in terms of like the reporters that are going there, because I only ever really look at like,
because it does seem like you'll have a bunch of liberal reporters who are like, President Biden, we're just curious about the ice cream flavor you had last week. And it's like, here, let me give you a really easy pitch. And then someone's like, no, I'll do an easy pitch. And then Peter Ducey will stand up and be like, why haven't you been to the border? And it's like, So, but it seems like,
but reporters that like after he asked that question and then she just kind of derails like that question, nobody like is kind of with him in terms of trying to follow up on that question at all.
Yeah, I think that's true. I think people, and Fox has always had that role where they're part of the mainstream, but all have a different interest. Back in the day when Obama, it was all about Benghazi, and I think that reporters could understand what perspective you were reporting from, and I think a lot of people respected the Fox journalists in the room. But even now, like they'll be collegial to Ducey and certainly understand what he's doing. He's trying to serve his audience,
right,
asking these questions. But yeah, this is why I think the Biden administration just fundamentally has sort of given up on the idea of actually communicating, using the briefing room, convincing reporters, trying to convince reporters to cover things a certain way and have that back and forth conversation. Certainly publicly in the briefing room, it's just non-existent. There's very little information you can glean from the briefings.
Yeah, it does seem like they're leaning on social media a lot more. And something funny I saw right before the State of the Union, they made a post and it was about the State of the Union, just like, hey, tune in, whatever. And the day and the time was wrong, and they later corrected it. But it's like, what clowns are running like his cabinet? Like if all you're doing, the only thing you have to do today is to make a Twitter post on what time the State of the Union is. That's on every channel. And you have to know what day of the week it is. But like wrong day of the week, wrong time, post. It's like, well, who is
using an old graphic?
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. Just we'll just reuse last year's or whatever,
Yeah.
Yeah, it's just a clown
Some
show.
low-level staffer has the job and is just reusing a graphic, and that's the thing. You read the White House's social media, it's just terrible. None of it is compelling.
Yeah.
It's all just rehearsed talking points. And I think that going forward, the most, and this is already happening, where the most authentic candidate is, and Trump that seized on that and realized that authenticity was the most important thing, and he was nothing but authentic in social media and traditional media,
which is good and bad.
Shines, it shines through, and voters. You talk to voters and they're like, yeah, I get Trump's an asshole, but, I support a lot of his policies.
Right.
And I believe that he'll fight for it.
Something that Ben Shapiro says a lot, and I think that totally rings true, is he says that, like, Trump is the hammer waiting for a nail. And instead of being patient and waiting for that perfect nail and then boom, hits it, he's just there whacking things just constantly. And so when you're just like, oh, why are you hitting the wall? Oh, why did you hit the window? And you're just constantly like, oh, that's so, but then he hits the nail and you're like, boom, let's go. Like, yes, you did it correctly. And it's good and bad. It's great because then he gets that comment in, or he kind of like roasts someone publicly and then they step down from their position or they don't get elected. And you're like, wow, that was incredibly effective. And then other times he's just going after some, random cabinet member, or like recently he's been attacked. I think today or yesterday he was attacking Ron DeSantis and was just like talking about how we beat him so bad and it's embarrassing. And you're like, why? Okay, fine. But like, why don't you just, like, he rallied behind you. He had the humility to say, I'm going to support the candidate. You don't need to give platitudes to him. Just accept that he stepped down to you and run with it. Like, why would pushing him into the dirt, if not, it's just going to alienate people. Maybe not that many, but just have some class and just move on. You're the nominee. Great. Now be productive. But then you see him come out and do something and you're like, yes, that needed to be said. And no one else is going to say that. So it's a bit of a toss up. But speaking of, I think earlier I mentioned that the staffers running the White House social media are clowns. So speaking of clowns, you just wrote a new book called Amateur Hour.
Nice. Good transition.
Yeah, thank you. And I guess leading up to this, to actually talking about the book, what is it like as a journalist? You're constantly going through news stories. Maybe it's not all clickbaity, but it's very, this happened yesterday, I'm posting it in the morning, and you've got quick articles going. How is that mental transition from doing that to I'm writing a book that's like a year in the works and it needs editing and it needs footnoting, and it's a totally different, I would assume it's a totally different mindset of what you normally do. So how does that work?
The transition was really difficult, just abandoning the minute-to-minute coverage and focusing just on one project, because I did step down, or I did leave Breitbart right before I started the book. And so, but once I got, sufficiently went through a detox on the minute-to-minute social media and the news and everything, it was rewarding to sort of dive in and do a deep research project into Kamala Harris and her life and everything that she's done over the years. And, you go through a politician's autobiography or their memoir, and you can kind of see, when you first read it, you can just obviously have a lot of questions. Like, is this real? Or did this happen? Or what is she missing here? Or why didn't she mention this? And then you just kind of dive in and find all the old newspaper stories and talk to people from California and talk to, Democrat operatives here. And it was a very rewarding project. I really enjoyed it. I never thought that writing a book would be fun. It always seemed like a very difficult task, but once I got in the swing of things, it was a lot of fun. And certainly there's a lot of pressure to meet deadlines and everything, but totally rewarding experience. I wish I had done it earlier because it seemed very daunting.
Yeah, it's interesting. I'm sure there's other people that have written books on Kamala Harris, but it seems very appropriate in the time that we're in right now. Because I think a lot of people, even though it's a diss on her, but a lot of people, other than her name and knowing that she's not good at public speaking, don't know that much about her. They know that she kind of failed upwards and became president or became vice president. And I think it's pretty common, even for people who are like strong Democrats, they know that she was elected because Biden said he was going to elect a colored woman. And like they know that. And whether they like her or not, that's just, oh, great. But I think she's so like boring and kind of obviously a wreck in many ways. People don't even dig into her past. Like I feel like when Obama was president, he was just heralded as this great like messiah, know, and he was going to cause all this social change and he was going to lead this coalition of the oppressed, and everyone was writing books on him, and just like, and with Kamala it was like, sweet, great, we have the first woman VP, and that's awesome. And then they started to just kind of wane because she wasn't that impressive. And so it's interesting that you'd think that there'd be all of these books and magazine articles and things like all over the place, and you don't really see that with her that much. And if it is, it doesn't seem like a very honest representation of who she is. So yeah, what kind of caused you to? I mean, there's all sorts of people you could write on. You could write on Biden. You could write on Trump. You could write on all these different things. So why focus on Kamala Harris?
Yeah, I think for the first time there's a real possibility that Kamala Harris could be the 47th president of the United States. And that's both a hilarious and terrifying prospect. And that's kind of what I kick off the book looking at, is like, what will that day look like when Biden and his handlers and his family finally realize that he can't do it anymore and has to step down. And when you look at that, Biden certainly hasn't positioned Kamala for success. Any opportunity that he gave her, it's a bit of a double-edged sword. He doesn't trust her anymore to do anything of substance, and she's proved unable to do anything beyond the basic appeals to, her safe spaces. At this point, they have her on the campaign trail talking three things: abortion, young people, and the African American vote. How can we bolster that? How can we rebuild it? Biden famously said he would pick a woman vice president during one of the last debates with Bernie Sanders, but it became very clear that they wanted to. There were two things at play. One was the George Floyd riots. It was very clear that they needed to address that in a serious way. And Kamala spent a lot of her political capital after losing her primary race for president. She spent a lot of capital boosting and communicating on that issue. And they obviously realized, I think there was a huge contingent of Obama people that believed if they wanted to put the Obama coalition together, that they would need a woman of color on the ticket. And I think that Obama himself felt that way. And made a pretty solid argument to Biden that he had to pick a woman of color, and that woman should be Kamala Harris. And you did not, Biden preferred Gretchen Whitmer from Michigan, much more plain spoken, had an easy way of explaining herself, liked infrastructure. She ran on the whole
fix the damn
roads,
yeah.
right? And so that, for an infrastructure guy like Biden, that was just music to his ears.
Right.
And he ended up selecting Kamala, which was not his natural first choice. I think even Jill Biden was on the record saying that she preferred Susan Rice, because Susan Rice was one of the ones that was on the list. And the Biden family still doesn't like Kamala. They didn't like her after they attacked Joe during the debates, when they basically made her famous. I don't think you're racist, but you're racist. So
right. Was it because of all the busing, right, that she experienced?
Where she, tried to portray herself as the victim of segregation in Oakland, California.
And then later at like an elite school in Montreal or something, right?
And then moved to
So
Canada and was spent most of her high school years in Montreal. So it was like in a very wealthy area of Canada, in Montreal, Canada. So it was like, well, not necessarily your lived-in experience isn't matching the rhetoric that you're trying to use. And I think that's a lot of people saw through that when she ran her campaign for president, which is why it flopped miserably in spite of everything she had going for her. Certainly the elites. If you remember when she first launched her campaign, the elites were calling her the next Obama.
Right.
The fundraisers were already in love with her, lined her up. Everyone in the media was supportive of her in her campaign. But as time went on, it was just very clear she did not have the sort of the authenticity and the discipline to focus on a message that made sense and driving that home and inspiring voters with speeches. I think that was the most interesting part going through her campaign, just realizing how bad it really was and how most Americans didn't realize how bad it really was because there just wasn't enough people calling it out. And I think a lot of Democrats probably should have been paying attention when they put her up as a vice presidential candidate, to really look at how bad she was at communicating with the American people and trying to get an agenda across.
So how did she get to where she was before then? Just like leading, I guess in your book you probably talked about it, but just like leading up to that, how did she even have the inkling to want to become president with everything that just started going wrong afterward?
Yeah, so she came up through politics, and as I go through, we'll do a quick run through. She got her start dating Willie Brown when he was running for mayor of San Francisco, and Willie Brown was already the most powerful politician in California through the state house when he ran for mayor. And he started dating Kamala Harris, and Kamala Harris was 29, he's 60 years old. He's still married to his wife, but his wife is long estranged They never got divorced, but he was a constant, it was very clear he was living life as a single man. But yeah, and so through that relationship, she gets her start in politics. She eventually runs for district attorney and all the elites. And it's kind of awkward. It's just the way that a single party state works. If you can convince the elites and the money people in San Francisco that you belong on the stage and you demand, that position, you're going to get it. The voters are going to follow pretty much what the establishment in California is going to tell you to do. Right. So she runs for district attorney, runs again unopposed, and then runs for attorney general, and does one term there, gets reelected. And right after she's reelected, she's eyeing the governor's seat versus Gavin Newsom, who's also eyeing the governor's seat. And lo and behold, Senator Barbara Boxer steps down in California, sort of opening up this release valve. So Kamala ends up running for senator, and Gavin Newsom runs for governor, and there's no showdown. But ultimately, she won that race pretty handily and came to Washington the same day that Trump came to Washington. And so she had that foil kind of driving her forward as she kicked off her Senate career.
Okay. I think that's a good place to stop real quick. I want to take a quick break, and then we're going to get back into it and talk about Kamala Harris and how she got to the White House and all those good things. So we'll be right back.
This podcast this evening. Anthony, after you.
So I had thought about how to reopen after the break, and Mark kind of ruined it, but I didn't ruin it. That was perfect. We can cut. Okay, so I heard today a quote that Kamala Harris has been saying a lot recently, and you mentioned this on an episode interview you did with Megyn Kelly, and they played a montage, and it's what can be unburdened by what has been, and this is she's trying to make this her slogan somehow, even though it doesn't make sense and it's not catchy. But she just keeps bringing this up, like, unburdened by what has been. You're like, what are you saying? And I feel like that almost encapsulates Kamala Harris. Like, trying to say something that is like this, in her mind, is like this Reagan-esque line.
Yeah, it's her hope and change.
It's just this word salad. It's nothing.
She really seized on this early, and the idea is to view history by what can be, unburdened by what has been. And so this was very much her political catchphrase that she really tried to make happen, but nobody got.
That's the first time I've heard it, honestly.
Yeah, nobody really seized on it, and so but she'll keep doing it, and that's sort of the idea. But that her whole campaign spends a lot of time burdening voters with what has been.
Right.
That a huge part of what a politician does is talk about what has been, what has happened. There's very little that she's done to sort of look into the future. She's very much focused, especially on abortion. This is a right. This is a right that they took from you. The Supreme Court is evil. And,
and that just happened this past week. I saw an article that Mary Margaret Olohan from the Daily Caller, I think, posted, and she's the first VP or president, but first VP she actually visited a Planned Parenthood and was talking about how we need to overturn this decision and how, this is all about women's reproductive freedom and blah, 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 blah. And talks about how, it's horrible, these pro-life attacks on these places. Meanwhile, a year ago, all of these, pregnancy centers were getting graffitied and burned down, and no one bothered to talk about it. So it's just overall just despicable.
Yeah, they made a really big push on that. And she's definitely the one who's talking about abortion, because Biden doesn't like talking about abortion. He's sort of got that on his conscience, and he has a record showing that he's been basically pulled kicking and screaming into the pro-choice movement. He doesn't necessarily support abortion, but he's definitely on the hook now. And there's no line. The pro-abortion movement have moved into absolute freedom for the woman, no restrictions at all.
Yeah,
it's been very successful, and it's pretty dramatic. Where a lot of my career was definitely focused on weak bans. At what point do we stop? The Bush administration pushed hard on stopping partial birth abortions, but yeah, the movement has really And that's what's also interesting is like the pro-life movement has for years embraced this idea. And I think it was George Bush that really embraced the John Paul rhetoric that life begins from conception to natural death. And now all the Republicans are just frantic because they're finally starting to realize what that means. Mm-hmm. It means no Plan B. It means no IVF. It means all kinds of things. And now they're just panicking because they cannot say that anymore without having serious repercussions.
Yeah. And it's wild because if you look at what the actual median voter believes in, I think I saw a poll the other day, like most voters don't want abortion up to birth. Like that's not the majority. There are people that want that, right? Which is surprising because then even if Trump comes out, even if let's say he comes out tomorrow and says, I don't believe that, that there's a baby from conception, but I think after whatever arbitrary week he wants to set, a 10 week, a 15 week, maybe a heartbeat bill, but I believe it's from there. So if he said that, that would actually be what the majority of Americans believe, because even people who are pro-choice, a lot of them still think that, okay, maybe the heartbeat is when we should cut that off. The majority of people don't actually want it up to birth. That's just what you're being fed. But that's the extreme version, and that's what all of these Congress people and the Democrat Party has to latch onto because they don't want to be out-lefted, right?
Right, and I think
that's not the majority. That's not a winning issue for them, unfortunately.
Right, that's why they've changed the conversation entirely. That it's about woman. It's about the woman and her rights and freedom. Yeah, they're not even talking about a baby or anything at all. Yeah, or they're not talking about weeks. They're not talking about restrictions or limitations. They're like, let the woman decide. She has the freedom to do that. And I think that was something you saw in Pete Buttigieg's campaign. It was like, why are...
Before he went on paternity leave.
Yeah. Before he got his sweet gig at the transportation department. But a big part of his campaign was like, Republicans say they're for freedom, but why are they trying to restrict everything? Freedom means a right to health care. Freedom means the right to choose. And we're the party of freedom. It was kind of bold, but it resonated in Iowa. His message resonated in Iowa, and he ultimately won the state when most people thought Kamala was going to be the winner in Iowa. But that just didn't happen.
It seems like there's a lot of unknowns with Kamala because I think people, at least on the left, got on board with her because she's a woman and a woman of color, and she seems to be pretty buddy-buddy, at least was. I don't know if she currently is buddy-buddy with Obama and Gavin Newsom, and you mentioned Willie Brown, and all of these like very powerful politicians. But then once she actually gets to be VP, everyone's a little bit embarrassed to say that they advocated for her. And so it's just like, okay, she's just kind of doing her own thing, and she's reading books to the kids and going on The View and, just kind of just dealing with it. But they don't want to push her on the immigration. They don't want to push her on just anything that could be controversial. They're afraid to push on that. And you can see, like, she's just a train wreck. And it's so surprising, and it's shocking that, number one, she even got to this spot. Right. But number two, that, if Biden somehow does win again, the likelihood that she'll be president is actually fairly high. Whether it's because Biden, passes away, which, would be terrible, but, that could happen, or he could just step down, but then she would be the president. And it's like, to me, it's just so shocking that there's no one better, like that no one can step in and say, okay, I can do this better. I'm your guy. Like it just doesn't seem possible to me. But they're kind of in this conundrum of if Biden, because I guess one option would be Biden could choose a new running mate. He could choose a new VP, but then that would be admitting that he was wrong in choosing her.
Right. And the most important decision a president makes is choosing his running mate.
Right. And so if he says that he was wrong,
somebody else, is he going to admitting a mistake?
Right. And I think that was one big mistake. You mentioned this on the podcast I was listening to today, I think with Megyn Kelly again, that you said one of the biggest mistakes that Hillary made was she chose a white man. And she had the opportunity to make the diverse choice. Now, I don't know if she would have won because of that, but her running mate did not check the boxes. It was Democrat, but
he was as vanilla as they come.
Right.
Tim Kaine.
Right. Tim Kaine. You're right.
Nothing controversial.
Nobody.
About him.
Yeah. Which I guess maybe she considered.
Maybe it was a safe choice.
Yeah, a safe option. But which is odd because it doesn't seem like Kamala was the safe option. But it does seem like Biden's team was somewhat bullied into choosing her, whether it was Obama or other people.
It was a very political decision. It was, and it was very based on identity politics. And that's when you play identity politics, you risk being stuck.
Yep.
And that's why they can't replace her, because you'll immediately anger everybody
Racism,
who's hailed the era of the first historic black woman vice president. And then if you replace her, then then you anger everybody that you placated by selecting her. And so I think that's impossible. So yeah, that's why they're kind of stuck at this point. I think, and I've sort of talked about this problem that the Democrats have, and like the only one who could really like jump over Kamala would be Michelle Obama. But
she's made it pretty clear that she doesn't want to run.
What's interesting is that she, I think a couple weeks ago, had a spokesperson reiterate that she was not interested in running. But I think until you hear her on camera saying those words,
Yeah,
I don't think she wants to. I don't think she feels like it's necessary. But until she does, you can't entirely rule it out.
Right.
So
especially because someone like her would wipe the competition. Like, you think that Trump is up in the polls, and you think, oh, it seems like he has a pretty good chance. If Michelle Obama all of a sudden says, I'm going to be your nominee, like, the Obamas are still hailed as gods. And even people who are, more moderate, even like central, would probably vote for them because they seem less controversial than Trump.
Right. You would have all of your suburban Republican voters and be like,
it's scary.
Yeah.
Support the first woman president.
Right.
Michelle Obama.
Yeah.
How did the Democrats react to Biden's pick of Kamala? Did it help him, or did it hinder him, or it was just kind of in the middle?
No, it helped him a lot. It was seen as a very bold, very historic choice, and it was the perfect foil to people like Mike Pence and Trump. I think it was someone who was, sort of considered to be young and interesting and, diverse, and I think that most Democrats were pretty excited by it at the time. But yeah, and it wasn't until, and even not because it was a campaign held during COVID, right? So there wasn't that much room for error. Right. There were very few events that she actually had to participate in. I think, I found a couple. There's one where she was, during the campaign, she does this Zoom with like a whole bunch of Marvel stars from the Avengers movies. And they're like having fun and encouraging people to vote and talking about everything. And then they're like, Kamala, what, if you could choose one superhero power from the Avengers, what would it be? And then she launches into this like 3 to 4 minute long word salad, basically saying that the superpower she would want would be to be able to bring people together and support science and innovation. And ultimately she gets to the point where she's like Shuri from the Black Panther movie. That's the power I would want. And everyone is just kind of sits there for a minute like, what's she saying?
You're brave and beautiful.
Just like, wow. And
they're like, wow. Yeah, I think it was Mark Ruffalo was like, wow, great answer.
Jump to something else.
Yeah. It was like, and then that's sort of what I chatted with Megyn Kelly about. Like, that's kind of basic politics, right? If you can't answer what superpower you would have in a short 1 minute, 30-second answer, you might not have what it takes.
Yeah. Something that's been commented on a lot in the news is just the fact that, like you have people like Obama who had bad administration, had bad policies, but they were in some sense an actual inspiration. Like they weren't a good person, but they could inspire people. They had good speeches. They were able to convince people with rhetoric of terrible ideas. They had staffers who were loyal, good speech writers, all these things. And it seems like Kamala has none of those things. Like, she's had a huge turnover. Like, I think 13 some people left just in the first year and a half of her just being VP. Staff writers are complaining that they'll write something for her. She biffs it and doesn't say what they told her to say, and then she blames the staff writer.
Right.
And is, doesn't take ownership over different things. Like, just all of these things. And it's so shocking that she's still in the position that she is, and that she's still revered on a large scale, or that people just say we don't really know what to do with her. And actually, a title of a podcast you did was "How to Solve a Problem Like Kamala." And it's like, that is so true. Like, I don't think the Democrats know what to do with her.
Yeah, and I heard this, and this is how Democrats talk in D.C. Like, they have completely written her off and know that there's nothing they can do at this point, and that's why so many staff are leaving. Like, people in Washington, staffers in Washington D.C. are either work because they're inspired or they work out of pure calculus. Like, if I work for this person, maybe she'll have a political future, and I'll rise up in the ranks and be able to get out at the at the right time and get that brand. If you get the brand of a politician, then that'll lead you to a lucrative future. But I think that so many people are realizing that no, Kamala's not it, and I have no future here. That's why they left. Staffers were leaving the vice president's office and going to the Pentagon or going to the State Department. Like, these are not lateral moves. You are clearly stepping down in your career to adjust to a different way of life, and there's a reason for doing that.
Right. I know you mentioned this in the book, but you can probably explain it better than I can. There seems to be a lot of headbutting, particularly with Jill Biden and Kamala. I think probably with Joe Biden too, but in my opinion, he probably just has too much going on to really hold a grudge, and maybe he has some angst about the way he was treated as vice president with Obama, right. And so he kind of maybe has a little bit of compassion on her, even if she screws things up and doesn't take care of the things he asked her to take care of. But it seems like, especially with Jill Biden, there is not the camaraderie that's normally there with the president's wife and with the vice president's wife or the vice president. What does that look like practically?
Yeah, I think Joe Biden wanted a buddy VP. He wanted somebody he could really get along with, because a big part of Biden's entire political career is his ability to, engage on a personal level. And I think with Kamala, he thought he could do that, and you certainly saw that when people asked, why did you choose Kamala, and he would talk about how they were going to be great friends and get along and collaborate on everything and talk about policies and agree on everything. But it became very clear that Kamala Harris didn't necessarily want to be a buddy, and not only that, she's famously protective of her own political brand. When she's supposed to be stepping up to take some of the slings and arrows from the president, and all of a sudden she's sort of not interested. Recently, I think after the special counsel report, there were reports that Biden staff asked her to go on the Sunday show to defend the president, and she turned him down. So wow. She's like, I'll deliver a speech today in front of reporters, but I'm not doing the Sunday shows.
Yeah.
And then a couple weeks later, who's on the Sunday shows? Gavin Newsom defending the president in his flowery language. Oh, well, look at this. They found somebody else.
And it kind of makes you wonder, that must be one of the most difficult things to navigate as a president, especially when you're older and things are falling apart and you have people that were supporting you because you're the nominee that all of a sudden are realizing that you're too old to be president. So you have even people who are leftist reporters saying, well, Biden's old, but he at least has wisdom and things like that. They're just coddling him, but you can tell even through those lies that they think he's too old and he's not doing a good job. It must be so difficult for Biden to be able to try to maintain that, or probably his staff more than him, but to try to maintain face and act like everything's okay between him and Kamala. And meanwhile, Kamala's not standing up for him and not doing the things he How do you
stood up a lot at the State of the Union?
No ripped speeches, right? But it's just wild. It must be so difficult to try to control a vice president. They're supposed to go put out fires and be on immigration and diplomacy. And if you're not doing any of those things, it just makes you look bad. But she's not. She's very clearly. I don't know. She seems to be kind of cavalier about her position. She doesn't really seem to care about preserving whatever legacy Biden has, and it seems like she has more political gains that she's trying to pursue, and almost leaving him in the dust a little bit.
Yeah, I think naturally she's protecting her own political future. She views, her, the fact that she was on the ticket as something she very much wanted, and but a huge part of it has to be a calculus of. When you look at Joe Biden, when he was vice president, did anyone really expect that he would run and win for president? Nobody ever thought that. And they kind of saw him as a clown, kind of a bumbling, gaff-ridden fool who had no political future. And lo and behold, he runs for president in 2020 and wins. So if you're Kamala Harris, you look at that and be like, yeah, I got a tough hand. Nobody really likes me. But if I just wait everybody out, I'll be positioned to be the number one choice when it comes to the next primary. So granted, it seems a bit of a stretch with how unpopular they both are. It kind of feels like the narrative has already been written on the Biden administration, but, you know, maybe she does have a political future. And I certainly expect to see her on the campaign trail in the future, in a future primary.
Right, sure.
Even if Biden does lose, I think she'll be out there.
Yeah.
I feel like it's just so amazing how unremarkable these people are.
Yeah.
I don't know. It just like Biden not... People obviously things had to align that he became president, but
Right.
But you have
just
a 80-year-old houseplant, and then someone who's like completely unprofessional and terrible at everything they've done, and
But
they
the
end up being
hatred of Trump.
Yeah.
No, I know.
Takes the cake.
I know.
It's
You
real.
just I mean, I don't know. Just all that you've been talking about with Kamala, it's just like she was literally just riding the waves. Like she was just riding them up, and then it was just now she's here, and everyone's like, "What the heck is happening?"
Yeah.
I don't know. That I just
Well, you see
I just
that,
find
like,
that
even
so
in her
amazing.
campaign in California. You mentioned this. I was reading this just in your book today, where people are trying to pick a side with crime. Like, we're going to be hard on crime. We're going to be soft on crime. And she couldn't even commit to that. So she's like, you know what? I'm going to be smart on crime.
Yeah.
What does that mean? Like, smart on crime? Like, you mean you're going to enforce the law? No, I'm not going to enforce the law. And she famously didn't enforce the death penalty for some police officers that were killed, and just all of these different things where she's just always trying to see what's the most advantageous thing I can do.
Yeah.
What donor is giving? What movement can I hop on? And I'm just going to do that and act like that's been my position the entire time.
Yeah,
It's
it was very much
terrible.
because the district attorney she ran against, the incumbent, was a very sort of considered the anti-Rudy Giuliani. He was a very progressive candidate that wasn't charging low-level crimes and stuff like pot and drugs and pornography. And he was famously lenient, and the San Francisco elites were kind of done with him. They're just like, look at all the homelessness and poverty and all the drugs in the streets. Like, we need somebody who's going to be, a little more law and order around here. And that's why Smart on Crime made sense and actually resonated, because they were already tired of the progressive politics that was already being practiced. So.
Well, it's funny you bring up marijuana. I think probably the next page or two in the book you were talking about how even on marijuana she didn't want to commit one way or the other, and she just wouldn't say whether she was pro or against. And then at one point she was like, well, I have relatives from Jamaica or something like that, just kind of making a joke.
After
like, I'm
she
okay
won
with it,
her re-election campaign for attorney general, she was suddenly and refusing to take a position. I think reporters asked her about her opinion. She just laughed at them and didn't answer. And then she would start talking like, well, half my family's from Jamaica, so I'm obviously for it.
yeah. It's so wild. I think that she's definitely, maybe it's just because people have gotten tired of her, but it just seems like, like every day you have gaffes from Biden, obviously, but you have these speeches that she'll give, and I don't know if they're scripted or unscripted, but either way, if it's scripted, she's not reading the script, and if it's unscripted, it's the worst. Just whatever she's saying, whatever's on her mind, and she'll just be in these. I think you refer in the book a lot as like word salads, and that's kind of been a phrase that's been tossed around, where it's just like you're saying words, and then the big thing, actually, you mentioned this in Megyn Kelly's show. The big thing that she does is she'll define words that people don't need defined, rather than say, instead of saying some kind of complicated theory and then saying, hey, I'm going to be a good teacher and leader and kind of condense it down so that you can understand. I'm going to simplify policies. She'll say things like, just all the time, stupid things. Like, I think you were saying she was talking to a bunch of astronauts about the experience of like being an astronaut. It's like, they're the only people that understand this. Why are you're dumbing this down so unnecessarily
to an audience of astronauts? You're trying to explain to them what it's like to blast off into space.
Yeah, like, and how like inspiring and American that is.
Yeah,
like,
and
just tell them that they're great. Why are you making this about you? It's so narcissistic.
Yeah, and just the way when she's talking, off the cuff, she just typically adds a lot of dependent clauses without ending her sentences, and that's sort of what leads her to like speak circular. The importance of making history. During Women's History Month, we honor the women of history who have made history. Was famous.
Yeah, doing what we've been doing, and we need to keep on doing. Yeah.
They're all very hilarious, and you can tell when she's speaking off the cuff, just even to like a room of campaign volunteers, the clauses kick up and the hand motions start going, and she just keeps talking without ending her sentences. And I think that will always be a problem. But that's why they have her so scripted now. She has a now baked in campaign script on some of the issues. I think she did an interview with Katie Couric, just basically repeating the same talking points over and over. So I think they've definitely got her a little more locked down, a little more disciplined. And, at this point, the die is cast, right? They just have to work on getting both her and Biden across the finish line in November.
What do you think the likelihood of? I think a lot of people, at least conservatives, have the hope that Trump will win. They see he's ahead in the polls. They're hoping a lot of the court cases filed against him are bogus, that he's going to, even if he loses some of the minor ones, he's going to triumph because that's actually going to rally more support and all that. What do you think the likelihood, at least at this point with the information we have, what's the likelihood that Kamala, that they're even going to be able to pull through, despite immigration, despite all of these huge pitfalls that their campaign is seeing? It still seems like they have a lot of support, surprisingly.
Yeah, it'll be very interesting because right now you have the Biden campaign trying to push the idea that Trump is deranged, wild, toxic, and unsuitable for office. And they're trying to remind people how terrible it was in 2020. Do you
remember how low those gas prices were?
Yeah. Well, no, they're trying to remind you how much he embarrassed them when he was demanding that he step up and do like daily press conferences to talk about COVID. And ended up making comments about, injecting disinfectant and all the other things that happened. But yeah, I think that it really depends on, and this is kind of the way politics are happening now. It depends on those earnest suburban voters who are Republicans, who are voting on, who a big portion of what they vote on is, does this person make us look bad? And they are kind of squishy, but at least they vote. And so I think you're going to have a lot of them looking at Biden, at this Biden-Trump rematch. But I think, it's in Trump's favor because the incumbent is the one who has to answer for the way things are. And the way things are not very good right now. And I think that even suburban voters are feeling the pinch. And the question is, can Trump make the case that he actually will be a better president this time than he was in his first term? Will he be less embarrassing? And I think that he has demonstrated, at least on the campaign trail, that he is more disciplined and his operation is more intent and he is focused on the issues. So, yeah, I don't know. I think there are a lot of voters, and this is kind of my theory. I think there are a lot of voters who were radicalized by COVID and who no longer trust the government, who no longer trust government officials, who understand there is a deep state and there is an unfair bias, and there is an attempt by those in power to control media and to be suspicious of everything coming out of the media. I think those three things are flipped on their head this time around because of COVID. And maybe not everybody is ready to learn that lesson. Maybe everyone will eventually vote on which candidate will make us look bad, rather than, which candidate actually had a better record. Because we're at a very unique point in history where both Biden and Trump are running, and they both have 4 years to show for it. So compare the two. So I think that's kind of what we're looking at.
Do you think a lot of that could depend on who Trump picks to be VP? Like if he picks someone that's really respected, and I know there was a lot of political pundits who were like, maybe he'll pick Tucker Carlson or he'll pick Vivek or different things. And do you think that could radically sway, or do you think that there's a strong enough Trump base that more or less, regardless of who he picks, he's either going to win or lose, and it's not really going to be dependent on his VP?
Yeah, I don't think it will be too dependent on the VP, but I do think he'll pick a little more of an establishment figure.
Yeah.
I think that he needs to prove to the establishment that he's serious about winning over their votes, and the best way to do that is to pick a VP. Who got the most money and support in the primaries from the establishment? I think that was Tim Scott.
Yeah.
He spent a lot of money, millions and millions of dollars on that failed campaign, and he had a lot of people that supported him. And I think that a lot of establishment people are happy with the idea of a Tim Scott. And Tim Scott certainly seems to want the job. So I think that...
He does seem to be in the front running, from what I've heard.
Yeah, I think that if Trump wants to reach to some of these disaffected Republicans who voted for Nikki Haley, I don't think he's going to pick Nikki Haley anymore. That ship has sailed. But I think that maybe a Tim Scott or some other establishment-friendly VP would go a long way.
Yeah. One question I want to ask you before we wrap up. I know that the whole process of writing a book is pretty difficult. There's a lot of research that goes into it. There's a lot of editing that goes into it. But beyond that, there's another kind of field of challenges that you have to cross, and that's getting the word out. So I'm curious how, well, number one, you have a recommendation on the back from Tucker Carlson. Like, is that, like, that's not an easy recommendation or book blurb to get. So for some of these people, is that just really calling in a favor? Is that, harassing? Like, what, how much do you have to do? And then also, you've been on Tim Pool's podcast, Megyn Kelly. Is that just calling in a favor? Like, hey, I've done some favors for you in the past. I'm going to chime that in, or is that something that you just have been in the business long enough that you're able to actually legitimately ask them?
Yeah, that's sort of what it was. It was literally just cold texting a lot of these people and reaching out on different mediums. Twitter, surprisingly very effective. Yeah, I think that is also a lot of fun because you're finally like, all right, let me, brush off the cobwebs and get back into the swing of things where you're actually talking to people again and getting engaged, and you're like, here's what I've been doing for a year, and as I demonstrated tonight, I'm still happy to talk about it a lot for long periods of time. So, and that has also been rewarding, just getting out there and sharing some new information, something that is a long-term project, and that's been nothing but fun promoting the book.
I've just always been interested because I think, especially being in the not that we're in the podcast world in a big way, but a lot of it is who you know, and there's a lot of times where you're like, I'm not going to email this person, or I'm not going to text this person or message them, and you kind of feel like embarrassed about it. But I think a lot of people underestimate the power of just, this is what I want, and I'm going to ask. And the worst thing that can happen is they don't respond, and we already weren't talking. But I assume that being in the media, like, you have a little bit of name recognition, like the fact that you could, maybe I don't know if you know Megyn Kelly or Tim Pool or those people personally, but I assume you probably know their producers or someone that can put in a good word for you, which comes in handy. Maybe you don't think so. 10 years ago, you may not have thought about it, but then you're like, oh, I've got a book. I need to, I need a big podcast. Like, Tim Pool is a big podcast.
Yeah.
I saw that you were going to be on that, and I was really excited. And then I was a little bit disappointed that I felt like Tim talked a lot about other stuff, and I was like, I want to hear Charlie on Tim Pool. Like,
I was not ready for Tim Pool.
Is he in Maryland or?
Yeah,
okay.
He's got a complex out in Maryland, and it's really cool. And I was sort of blown away by the whole thing. And yeah, that guy, his mind works so quickly, and he talks really fast.
Yeah.
So yeah, and he was, his show is just free flowing, shooting, just talking about whatever. And then suddenly we were talking about implants, brain implants, or what is the Elon Musk brain implant called? It's
like the Neuralink?
The Neuralink.
Yeah.
The Neuralink. Yeah. He kept
it like devolved into
like
free will.
Yeah, he wanted to talk about how we could use the Neuralink to punish prisoners by changing their memories and feelings and thoughts and emotions.
You're like, I love this, but Kamala
I was
Harris.
like,
You're like, let's tie this back into the book. They have to only think about Kamala.
Secretly, I was kind of like really struggling. I'm like, what would Cutterback say about this? I know human nature is more powerful, and the human soul, is more powerful than the Neuralink could be. How do I fit this into an argument?
So, did you just reach out to Tim Pool and say, "Hey, I have a book. Can I come on?" Or were you approached?
Yeah, I think that one of his producers had reached out to me a while ago asking if I wanted to be on the show, because they were just looking to get more voices on the show. And that's what's the cool thing is, like, with the advent of the podcast era, there's just a lot of time. People are looking to fill a lot of time, and so they're happy to have you on, especially when you have something substantial like a book. I think that was advantageous for sure.
Yeah.
And hopefully that as this year progresses, I can continue to find new audiences, and it's certainly been a pleasure to hang out with you guys. Podcasts interviews are the best, It's like,
that's something.
Cable news is way more stressful. But
I can't even imagine. No, just kind of like doing some preliminary research for this. I was like, all right, I'll look up some of his interviews because I want to. I don't want to be like the classic Fox News interview. You know, today we have Charlie,
Yeah.
and he's going to talk about his book. Charlie, tell us about this. And it's a
Yeah.
2-minute summary, and it's like, great, order his book on Amazon. That's fine. I have no problem with that. But I'm not a Fox News anchor. I don't want to do that.
Yeah.
So
It's a different beast entirely.
It is, and I think that the struggle is trying to come up with things to talk about that don't seem like unintentional, where it's just like, so what street did you grow up on, what was that like, and it's like boring facts that people don't want to know about. But I listened to Megyn Kelly's interview today,
where do you
and I
think
was like,
the pyramids came from?
right, yeah, just kind of weird things where it's like, this doesn't need to devolve into like
The Neuralink
terrible
or
episodes
something.
of Joe Rogan or the Neuralink. Yeah. So I guess I am curious though, like, are there other people that you've reached out to that you're trying to get on, like any of the Daily Wire platforms, or like Rogan, or anyone that, like, you know, is kind of in the either conservative movement or central, that you're trying to get on just to get more exposure for the book?
Yeah, I mean, Joe Rogan would be the white whale, right? But
Totally.
everyone knows you don't really. Joe Rogan comes to you. You don't go to Joe Rogan.
Right.
He only picks who he wants. So.
I'm so curious how you get on to his podcast, because I know that you can't just like message him and get on. Like, I don't know if you have to do. I assume that you just have to do something.
You
so
have to impress
interesting.
you have to impress his friends.
Oh, okay, is that what it is?
Every once in a while, he'll drop something like, "Oh, my friend Tony Hinchcliffe put me on to you, and said you were interesting."
Interesting, yeah.
And so I think Theo, yeah, I just randomly pick up on this stuff because it's important to me. So it's always like, you know, I think Theo Vaughn, who now has his own pretty popular podcast, was desperate to get on Rogan for the longest time, and his friends at the time said, just wait. When he finds you, he will have you.
Yeah.
He will have you on. And so Theo Vaughn went and built a successful enough podcast where he got Joe's attention and brought him on. So
Yeah, the whole podcast industry, and I think especially podcasts like Rogan or like Pints with Aquinas, or like some of them are.
that's what I need to talk to Matt Fred. Yeah.
Actually, that's that
There's
kind of
this whole Catholic world where it's like, well, I don't really want to bother them with politics. That's not what they exist for.
You know what? I think the most you probably
maybe they do.
You've probably experienced it. I bet you've experienced this a lot, where there's so many people that you know, but not personally, but you know them once removed.
Yeah.
You know, where it's like, well, I don't know Tucker Carlson, but I know this person who's best friends with him.
Yeah.
And so then, boom, like book blurb, or, you know, you get something like that. And I think people underestimate how important that once removed knowledge is, because whether you talk yourself up to the person themselves, like you reach out, you message them, you harass them, or they just hear about you because you're close friends with someone, I think that people underestimate how powerful that is. Because you could be doing the coolest stuff in the world, no one's going to pay attention, but you reach out to the right person who knows the right person, you're going to get in. Is that so? I'm curious, with Tucker Carlson, did you reach out to him directly, or do you know someone that knows him?
Yeah, I did end up reaching out to him directly, and he was charitable enough to respond. I was shocked. I would send him a text into the ether.
This is kind of a dumb question of sorts, but for people who give you book blurbs, are you ever a little bit suspicious? Like, did they read the book? You know, like, especially if it's something like, this is a comprehensive guide for anyone who wants to learn about Kamala Harris, a must read. Like, did they read the book, or are they just like being polite because they know they have name cred? You know, like.
I think authors are very aware how necessary and how both easy they are and necessary to get a good blurb for your book. And so yeah, people like Molly Hemingway was hugely helpful in the whole process of writing the book. So asking her, it was no problem. And certainly some of the others were, you know, happy to chip in, and you know, they know how important it is because they were once first-time authors, and I think everybody on the blurb has written a book before, so I think that's why they were more than willing to help out.
I don't know what your thoughts are on some of the Daily Wire, some of the Daily Wire hosts, but I know that Megyn Kelly is pretty close with Ben Shapiro, and I wonder how hard it would be to like call in another favor and just be like, I just want 10 minutes of airtime on his show about Kamala Harris, or something like that.
With Ben,
you know?
He doesn't really have guests, right? It's just the Ben Shapiro show, and
he does, but it's rare.
Right.
So like Matt Fradd has been on his show, but that was because there was that whole thing about pornography.
Right.
And who is it? Dennis Prager.
Yeah.
Kind of said, oh, I think pornography is okay in this context, and Matt Fradd was like, no, I don't think so, and here's why. And there was this whole thing. So eventually Ben Shapiro was like, okay, we need to get a Catholic on here to sort this out.
Oh, wow.
And he had him on, but I do wonder how much you need to make a name for yourself before he'll have you on the show, because I know he's had Father Mike Schmitz on briefly. Like they're 10-minute interviews. It's not like his Sunday specials or anything crazy. But I do wonder how hard it is, especially with technology nowadays. How hard it is. Or Michael Knowles, maybe he's a little bit. Yeah, he's not as big as Ben Shapiro. I wonder how hard it would be to reach out to his producer or someone that knows him and just say, "Hey, I have a book on Kamala Harris. I'd love to give a 10-minute, interview on this and just see what happens." Like, I don't know. I don't have a book, so I'm not in a position to do that.
There's still ground unplowed for sure.
Yeah, is that something you're still currently doing?
Oh yeah, we're still doing book outreach. I just did an interview with Bannon on Friday, Steve Bannon in War Room.
Yeah, I saw that.
And that was amped up and high energy as usual with Steve. He's still very much the same guy that used to run Breitbart. So
I saw I think Bill O'Reilly too. You did one with.
Yeah.
So
that was really rewarding. He's somebody that does actually read the book.
Right.
And so he was very, very complimentary of the book. And I was, wow, Bill O'Reilly.
I'd be interested. I'd be interested.
Never saw this happening.
I think that Matt Fradd has made it pretty clear, and I've kind of adopted this mindset: is that I don't want to interview anyone that I don't think is interesting, and that's not because it's not a diss to people who have good content. It's just that I can't justify 3 or 4 hours to someone who is just like, I feel like I'm forcing myself, or it feels like a way to like build up the podcast or something. I don't want to do that. I just want to talk to people who are interesting, and if it catches on and people listen, great. And I'm curious. I think Matt Fradd kind of has that mentality where he's like, oh, they're interesting. I don't care if they have a big following or not. I'll have them on. I'd be curious if he would be interested in having you on just to talk about, because as far as I don't know if he's ever had anyone on to talk about what does it look like to be a Catholic journalist? He's had people who are like Catholic political science professors or involved in the political spectrum and they're Catholic. But I'm curious how hard it would be to just like talk to a couple people in Steubenville that know him and say, hey, I have a book on Kamala Harris. There's a big election coming up. I'm Catholic.
Yeah.
Here's my pitch. I have no idea because I'm not at the point where I want to reach out yet. But I wonder if you have some strings you could pull and get on. That would be pretty cool because I think he would be really fun to talk to.
Yeah,
and it's not that far either, which would be nice because you could actually go in person and not Zoom.
Where is he?
Steubenville.
Oh, he's based in Steubenville.
Yeah. There's a couple people. I bartended at a wedding with. I don't know if you're familiar with the New Polity podcast.
No.
But there's a Muslim convert to Catholicism who now lives in Steubenville, and he started a college called St. Joseph the Worker, and it's a trade school college.
Okay.
So the idea is you work a trade, you learn a trade,
right.
You live on campus, and you basically graduate debt-free with a skill, and there's profession lined up to hire you. But I bartended at a wedding with him here in Front Royal, had no idea who he was, and then like 2 weeks later, he was on Pints with Aquinas, and I was like, oh my gosh, I could have totally networked with this guy, but I didn't know who he was. So yeah, no, it's a small world in many ways, really but yeah.
Yeah, and social media, for all of its problems, has a great way of bringing people together and letting people create platforms, and so
yeah,
it's a very exciting time to be in journalism.
Totally.
And certainly, the more we move into the future, it's going to depend more on personalities. Do I trust this person?
Yeah.
And it comes down to that. Are you authentic, and can I trust you? Is the future of both politics and media.
Have you toyed with the idea at all of doing a podcast yourself at some point?
Yeah, everybody thinks about it, but I think there became a moment where the market, at least for political podcasts, has been pretty saturated. So,
yeah.
Unless you're one of these people that got it off the ground, people like a Matt Walsh or somebody who like got in early, I think that it's very hard to break ground. But there is value to having a podcast, even if there is no audience, right? Because you can use it as a tool to meet and have conversations with people and connect. And I think there is a lot of value there. And you hear a lot of the podcasters talk about that as well. It's like we're building a community.
Sure.
And I think even if you don't have the most popular podcast, if you use that as a tool to build up a network and a community, I think it's very valuable.
Yeah. Well, and I think that's kind of what we're trying to do here is like, I'm not trying to be the next Pints with Aquinas or the Ben Shapiro show or anything. It's like, if it gets to be that popular, that's great. But I want it to be authentic, and I just want to have people on that are interesting. And if we have people on that are interesting, they're going to bring in more people or recommend more people that are interesting. And as long as we're having a good time, I don't really care. Like if it does get to the point where it's big enough that I can do it full time, fine. But it's like so it's nice because you have that freedom of this isn't my full time job. I don't need this to be successful monetarily. So if it's going to be a side thing, I just want it to be fun. And I think that that's actually not a bad strategy to pursue, because then you can prioritize fun and not prioritize money, which is kind of not common. Like most people that start a podcast are like, in a year this needs to be successful and making me a lot of money, and I don't need that. Like it's fun. We get to have you on. Like I met you a couple of weeks ago for the first time at a book signing just down the street. Never met you before. We went to college with your younger sister, Marion. It's like, cool, sweet. He sounds fun. Wrote a book on Kamala Harris. It's interesting. Let's have him on. But there's nothing beyond that. There's nothing else we need. It's just like, sweet. Let's see what he wants to talk about.
It's a very fun medium, and I certainly thank you guys for having me on. It's been a blast hanging out, drinking some whiskey, and maybe we'll do it again as the election approaches. And
I actually was going to ask you. We don't have to do this on air, but since we're on air, we might as well. It might be. I thought it might be fun to do as we're getting really close to the election, like maybe a week before or really close to it. If you're interested, I'm sure there's other bigger podcasts you could go on. But if you don't have that opportunity, it might be interesting to have someone who's playing a little bit of insider baseball to come on and say, here's what I think is going to happen. Here's what Trump needs to say. Like, kind of do some, like, maybe not real time commentary. Just something just to hang out.
Don't make me make any predictions.
He's putting $10,000.
They're pretty terrible.
No, but it'd be neat. I mean, honestly, I think something that our audience specifically could benefit from is like explaining what the election process is. What maybe like the history of the Electoral College, like what that looked like at the founding, how that's changed, how people are using that, how voting day has changed, and kind of go into the history of that and what we should be thinking about. Maybe do it like a week or two before like voting happens, so people have something to chew on. Like as a Catholic, here's how we need to be approaching voting day. Because I don't know that many people that are actually that steeped in politics that could speak
I don't know if I can tell you about the intricacies of the Electoral College, but
you can read off Wikipedia. No one's gonna know. So, all right. Well, hey, Charlie.
Thanks so much.
Yeah, thanks for coming on. It's been a blast. And I look forward to at least talking to you again, hopefully on the podcast, but if not, just in person. So,
definitely.
This is Doing Virtue,
Catholic podcast,
where virtue is what we do.
Cheers.
Cheers. Thanks everyone for tuning in. Have a good evening.